It started with one line. Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped before the cameras and declared that Canada would pause its $17 billion F-35 fighter jet deal with the United States. That one sentence hit Washington harder than any missile. For decades, the F-35 program wasn't just about jets, it was about control. It was America's way of binding its allies, of keeping them dependent on U.S. technology, software, and supply chains. Once you joined, you couldn't leave. But Carney, the calm economist turned leader, saw what others ignored. The deal that was supposed to strengthen Canada's Air Force had become a trap of dependency. Each aircraft required American maintenance, American approval, and American data access. In Ottawa, whispers turned into headlines. Is Canada walking away from America's defense empire? Across the border, Pentagon phones rang non-stop. To Washington, Canada wasn't just a customer, it was family. But now, that family member was rebelling. Carney's message was subtle yet seismic. Canada will no longer be told what to buy, how to fly, or who to trust. And as those words echoed through the corridors of power, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a procurement review, it was the first crack in America's global armor. Welcome to the microsphere, where we expose how one decision can reshape global power. When the F-35 Lightning II first rolled out, it was hailed as the crown jewel of modern air warfare, a sleek, stealthy, next-generation fighter jet that promised to dominate the skies. It was marketed not just as a plane, but as a revolution in military power, the aircraft that would define the future. Washington called it the world's most advanced weapon system. But what Canada would soon discover is that beneath that shimmering image of technological glory lay a web of dependence, restriction, and quiet control. In the early years, Canada's plan seemed simple. Replace the aging F-18 Hornets with 88 brand-new F-35s, a $9 billion project that would strengthen the Royal Canadian Air Force and reinforce the country's role within NATO. But as time passed, that tidy number began to crumble. Hidden costs emerged like cracks in the foundation. By 2025, the total had ballooned to more than $17 billion, with still no fully combat-ready jets in sight. Each F-35 came with a price beyond its sticker tag, one that Canada had not anticipated. Software access fees, maintenance contracts that could only be performed in the United States, and perhaps most shocking of all, digital locks so tight that Canadian engineers couldn't even access their own jet's core systems without U.S. authorization. In short, Canada didn't own the jets, America did. What was once framed as a symbol of Allied trust now looked more like a leash. The F-35 was supposed to represent partnership. Instead, it revealed dependency disguised as defense. Every line of code, every diagnostic signal, every update had to pass through American systems. The more Ottawa invested, the less control it had. And then came the bombshell, the Auditor General's report. It painted a grim picture. Massive delays, soaring costs, and virtually no lasting benefits for Canadian industries. Billions were leaving the country, while domestic aerospace firms were left watching from the sidelines. For Prime Minister Mark Carney, a man with a reputation for precision and economic integrity, this was unacceptable. He wasn't a politician swayed by defense lobbyists or patriotic slogans. He was a pragmatist. And when the numbers didn't add up, he didn't hesitate. He ordered a full review of the F-35 program, a decision that immediately sent shockwaves through Washington. Because to the United States, this wasn't just about planes. It was about loyalty. For decades, participation in the F-35 program was treated as a badge of alliance, proof that you stood with America. But suddenly, one of its most trusted allies was saying, "Wait. We want to think for ourselves." Inside the Pentagon, alarm bells rang. Could Canada actually walk away? Across the Atlantic, analysts from Berlin to Tokyo began watching closely. If Canada, polite, dependable, diplomatic Canada dared to challenge the crown jewel of U.S. defense policy, what would stop others from following? That's when the whispers began. In European capitals, defense advisors quietly started calling it the Canadian question. The unthinkable was unfolding. A quiet, reasoned, and utterly Canadian revolution. Not one built on protest or confrontation, but on calculated courage. The courage to say, we can stand on our own. And that single act, a review, a pause, a question, cracked open something much larger than a $17 billion deal. It cracked open the illusion that American protection equals independence. For the first time in decades, the world saw Canada not as a follower, but as a nation ready to rewrite its own destiny. While the U.S. tried to pressure Canada back in line, Sweden saw opportunity. Its defense giant, Saab, stepped forward with a bold counteroffer, one that could rewrite the rules of global defense. They didn't just want to sell jets, they wanted to build them in Canada. The proposal: produce the Gripen E fighter entirely on Canadian soil, in partnership with local aerospace companies like Bombardier and CAE. That meant thousands of jobs, full control over technology, and, for the first time in decades, true defense sovereignty. The Gripen wasn't a flashy marketing project backed by billion-dollar U.S. lobbying. It was a practical, rugged aircraft that could take off from icy highways, be repaired by local technicians, and fly without digital permission from Washington. Saab's offer wasn't just about planes. It was a philosophical strike against American dominance. It said, you don't have to rent your strength. You can build it yourself. For Carney, it wasn't just tempting. It was transformational. Canada would no longer be a buyer in someone else's empire. It would become a builder in its own future. And for the first time, the question wasn't, which jet is better? It was, who do we want to be? A tenant in America's system, or the master of our own skies? That's when the balance of power truly began to shift. The moment Canada hit pause, panic rippled through Washington. Top defense officials called Ottawa within hours. Lobbyists from Lockheed Martin swarmed Canadian ministers, warning of economic collapse if the deal fell apart. Behind closed doors, threats were made. Pull out, and nor aid cooperation could suffer. But Carney didn't blink. He knew this wasn't about jets, it was about control. For years, Washington had treated the F-35 program like a loyalty test. Stay in line, and you're a trusted ally. Step out, and you're isolated. But this time, the script was changing. Canadian media praised Carney's courage. Polls showed the public overwhelmingly supported the review. People were tired of being told that loyalty meant dependence. Even U.S. officials privately admitted their real fear wasn't about fighter jets. It was about the idea of independence spreading. One Pentagon insider said it best. The Gripen isn't the real threat. It's the idea behind it. If Canada can do this, others will start asking, why can't we? For Washington, that was terrifying. For Canada, it was liberation. The world had just witnessed a rare act of political courage, the moment a middle power dared to challenge the biggest power of all. Carney's strategy was never anti-American. It was pro-sovereignty. He believed Canada's real power didn't come from buying U.S. weapons. It came from building its own capability. He introduced a new policy. Every defense deal must deliver tangible benefits inside Canada. That meant local manufacturing, technology sharing, and guaranteed domestic jobs. No more billions flowing abroad. Critics in Washington called it economic nationalism. Canadians called it common sense. Carney saw what many leaders ignored, that true security isn't just about defense. It's about independence. By linking military power to innovation and industry, he was setting a model that could redefine the global arms race. His message was clear. Real power doesn't come from what you buy. It comes from what you build. Across Europe, governments quietly took note. Germany, Finland, even France began reconsidering their long-term F-35 commitments. And just like that, the Gripen domino effect began. Canada's rebellion had lit a spark, not of war, but of awakening. Carney's strategy was never anti-American. It was pro-sovereignty. He believed Canada's real power didn't come from buying U.S. weapons. It came from building its own capability. He introduced a new policy. Every defense deal must deliver tangible benefits inside Canada. That meant local manufacturing, technology sharing, and guaranteed domestic jobs. No more billions flowing abroad. Critics in Washington called it economic nationalism. Canadians called it common sense. Carney saw what many leaders ignored, that true security isn't just about defense. It's about independence. By linking military power to innovation and industry, he was setting a model that could redefine the global arms race. His message was clear. Real power doesn't come from what you buy. It comes from what you build. Across Europe, governments quietly took note. Germany, Finland, even France began reconsidering their long-term F-35 commitments. And just like that, the Gripen domino effect began. Canada's rebellion had lit a spark, not of war, but of awakening. Inside Washington, the tone turned desperate. Media outlets painted Carney as reckless, warning that Canada was risking NATO unity. But deep down, U.S. officials knew the truth. The real threat wasn't military. It was ideological. For decades, America's strength came from control over defense dependence. Every ally who joined the F-35 web was another strand in that network of influence. But now, those threads were starting to loosen. As one former defense advisor admitted, if Canada walks away, others will follow. And if that happens, we lose more than a contract. We lose control. And that's exactly what scared Washington. Canada wasn't rebelling with rage, it was leading with reason. And that kind of defiance, quiet, confident, rational, was far more dangerous than confrontation. By the time the year ended, the F-35 wasn't just a fighter jet anymore. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with the old world order, and Canada had become its unexpected challenger. By late 2025, one thing had become unmistakably clear. Canada had changed forever. What began as a simple pause on a military contract had turned into a profound statement of national identity. Whether or not the Gripen deal with Sweden was ultimately finalized didn't matter anymore. The real victory had already been won, the victory of sovereignty over submission. For decades, Canada had been seen as America's loyal, dependable partner, a steady voice in the shadow of a giant. But that image no longer fit. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada didn't just question a weapons deal, it questioned the very assumptions that defined its relationship with the United States. Carney redefined what it meant to be an ally, not obedient, but equal. No longer the quiet participant in America's grand defense narrative, Canada had found its own voice, and it spoke with clarity, reason, and purpose. Across the world, the reaction was immediate. In Europe, Asia, and beyond, nations watched closely, not because of the jets, but because of what Canada represented, a shift in global consciousness. This wasn't about military power anymore. It was about philosophy, about the idea that freedom isn't something you're given by great powers. It's something you build with courage. One analyst put it perfectly. Sometimes, refusal is not defiance. It's self-respect. And that single idea became the moral core of Canada's transformation. For nearly a century, the United States had built an empire of influence, not through conquest, but through contracts. Nations were told that partnership meant dependence, that protection came at the cost of autonomy. But then, from the quiet north, a new example emerged. A nation proving that you can defend yourself without surrendering your dignity. Carney's decision wasn't anti-American, it was pro-Canadian. It was rooted in confidence, not confrontation. He didn't seek to destroy alliances, he sought to rebalance them. And in doing so, he gave a voice to something millions around the world quietly longed for: the right to stand tall, even beside a superpower. As the roar of fighter jets fades into the distance, a quieter sound echoes from Ottawa to Washington: the sound of realization that the old world order, where one nation dictates and others comply, is slowly dissolving. And in its place, something new is rising: a network of equals, bound not by obedience, but by mutual respect. This moment, born not from war, but from a single courageous choice, marks the beginning of a new chapter in global power. A chapter where strength is measured not by dominance, but by independence. Canada didn't just renegotiate a contract, it redefined what power means in the 21st century. And as history turns its page, one truth stands tall: the era of American dominance is fading, and in its place dawns a new age, an age of sovereignty, self-determination, and silent strength. You've been watching The Microsphere, where every story uncovers the forces reshaping our world. Because in today's world, the most powerful weapon is independence.